listen to fall to the floor.
Hello, welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thanks for tuning in. No, you're not seeing double. They are more paternal twins than identical twins. They're made in the same factory, in the Lingmo factory, which is probably named something else, or it could be part of some other major pen conglomerate in China. But this one I was given as a gift. My friend Frank, who knows I enjoy Chinese pens and enjoys finding unique ones that I find very interesting, like the Live-In U pen. And this is the classic Lingmo Lorelei. The resin is the same for both these pens, but because of the way they're machined and the thicknesses and the sizes, they do look a little different. Not certain if this light's going to show that difference, but the PENBBS is a slightly larger pen, and that makes the resin a little bit darker because it's a little thicker. At least that's my theory on it. We have a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of LED light, but there is some nice chatoyancy in the red. You know, for those of you that like red pens, this certainly would fit the bill. I enjoy the interesting details that this resin has in it. It's your standard screw-off cap. It fits well in the hand unposted, and it does post fine. You know, that's a little bit big, but the balance is fine. It's not a real heavy pen. I call it medium weight. And it has a classic PENBBS nib in it, which I like the way it writes. It's a fine, but it has some medium qualities to it. Nice tipping material and that little bit of an upturn, which one of my viewers reminds you of, like a little bit of the feather touch nibs that Schaefer made in the 30s. So the Lingmo Lorelei is very similar, the same large cap band. I think the clip is identical on the two pens. And this also has that nice chatoyancy to it, but you can see the converter inside, which didn't show up that much in the thicker resin of the PENBBS. Screw-off cap again. This is slightly smaller. We'll compare those dimensions for you. And this does post fine. And it actually fits nicer in the hand. It's not quite as large posted as the PENBBS is. And this has your classic fine Lingmo nib in it. Again, you can see that turns down the other way. Nice tipping material. And this is actually on the fine side, where the other nib I would say is more on the medium fine side. So you may ask, how does this pen compare? I think this is a nice series to compare to. You have your PENBBS, which is actually one of the larger pens. The X450 is definitely larger. But the Lingmo Lorelei is actually very similar to the Sailor 1911 Standard. It's also in red, but certainly not the same type of interesting acrylic that these two pens are in. I tried to line up the bottom of the pen so you can look at the top and see how the difference in length are, and see how the Sailor and Lingmo are pretty much almost the identical length. Posted, you can see that the PENBBS is definitely much longer. The Lingmo and the Sailor again are similar size, and the X450 really doesn't post very securely, and it makes for a large pen, and it's a heavy cap, so it's probably a pen that I certainly wouldn't post most of the time. Getting down to the business end, we see differences continue. You have the contoured section here on the 450, your standard Sailor section, which is actually a little bit more diameter than the Lingmo, and the PENBBS is actually quite a nice section. I think it's about the perfect size section from my hands and what I enjoy writing with. Of course, one of the main differences is the Sailor has a 21 karat nib and it writes like a Sailor nib, where these other ones are not quite the same but still have their own appeal. Just for comparison's sake, I'm revisiting the green one, which is the first L'Oreal that I looked at, and it is a very, very nice resin. Unfortunately, this pen seems to be difficult to find nowadays. They probably ran out of the resin stock that they were using for it. As I mentioned, these pens are more similar than dissimilar, but just different enough that the PENBBS, to me, puts it into a more pleasant writing experience from both the size and the type of nib that's on it. The acrylics are similar, but there are some slight differences which I think are mostly attributed to the thickness of the acrylic that was remaining after they did their machining. It's always interesting to find an ink that I've had for a while that I really haven't used much, is these Noodler's Burgundy. Both of these are cartridge converter pens, so there's no reason to show you filling up the cartridge. Yeah, that's how the ink looks. It's a very dark, deep red. I haven't used oxblood, but that might be a similar color to this. This is definitely red ink. There's no doubt in my mind about it. I don't do the paper towel blot thing very often, but this one just shows how clean and pure it is, and the chromatography also is very clean. You got your nice saturated red here up at the top, and I don't see any other colors in there. You know, I think red is one of the primary colors. And I thought I'd let it dry to see if that makes any change to it. As you can see, there's really nothing significant here where it dried for 24 hours, so this is certainly not a bulletproof or permanent ink. So I'm going to write with the Lingmo first. It feels really well in the hand. The section is a little bit on the small side, but it's in the right proportions to the size of the pen, in my view. This nib is smooth and wet. I think it's a little bit wider than the nib that I've had on my other Lingmos, so we'll call this a true fine. The other ones were more in the line of an extra fine. It's a pleasure to write with. As you can see, I'm holding it up by the threads, and it's comfortable up there. A lot of that has to do with trying to write over the camera. The other thing you'll notice is the section has gotten a little bit of darkness in there from the ink, which is settled around the feed. Nothing to be concerned about. Cleaning it out, you know, probably pull that nib when I clean and make certain it gets thoroughly flushed out. So let's switch over to the PENBBS. So it came in the standard black box with a label on it. It just has some nice foam inside to protect the pen. So it's a nice simple packaging, generic. It works fine. I'm not a fan of you know, expensive packaging. I want a pen, the money to go into the pen and how it writes. So this is now, I think I made a note of the fact that the SF on the designation, I think, refers to soft fine. And this nib does have a little bit of bounce to it, more than the Lingmo nib did. This nib is a little bit wetter and a little bit wider. You know, not a lot, but just enough. So this is smoother and wetter than the Lingmo. Easy to lay down a nice patch of ink. Yeah, it's a real clean, dark red. Maybe a little bit of blue in there. So overall, I'm very impressed with the PENBBS pen. It cost about $6 or $7 more than the Lingmo, but I think that's a good investment for a pen that, to me, is a much better size section here. The flare out at the end is nice. The threads are inconsequential. The other thing that I'll show you is they've done the same thing inside the threads here, which make it a little bit, you know, need a little bit of effort to take this barrel off the section. I put some silicone grease on there so it slides a little bit easier, but there's a nice little O-ring there. So this pen is obviously going to be easy to do an eyedropper if that's what you want. I'm not ready to just fill this thing up with one ink, so I'm using a converter. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed a look at another pen you may not have that much experience with. May you enjoy all the variety of pens, inks, and paper. Explore, expand, bring pleasure into your life. Bye.